Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining our talk to the NACT on proactive measures to tackle cybersecurity risks in Treasury operations. This presentation is a redacted version of a much longer presentation that we've done on a regular basis, but it has been updated specifically with respect to the pandemic in mind and some of the challenges you're dealing with today. I'm joined today by Michael Quinn of Kroll. Mike runs the group there, or is in the group there, that are responsible for helping organizations deal with cyber risk, prevention, and mitigation for when bad things happen. I'll be talking about the Treasurer's perspective on the topic. And below here you can see our emails if you want to ask further questions, because we only have 15 minutes today. The current environment is, of course, cyber risk and fraud have very much become a more important issue. At the beginning of the year, we did a study, and this was just as COVID was becoming a thing. So even pre-COVID, a lot of treasurers had prioritized cybersecurity and fraud prevention up from a lower level you can see here in prior years to top 5. And what we've seen since the pandemic has impacted everybody and organizations have spread out their workforce is that the attacks have gotten many-fold worse. I think, Mike, you've had some experience with this recently, haven't you?
Absolutely. So we have seen a large increase, especially around March when COVID first hit, increase in business email compromises due to phishing emails that appeared to be associated with COVID announcements and things of that nature. So absolutely, we've not only seen it with the business email compromise, but along with corporate encryption or network encryption via ransomware, which we'll talk about later.
Right, and that takes us to our next point. So as the pandemic was progressing, we've done a lot of thought leadership, talking to treasurers and their teams about what they're doing and trying to provide some structure for organizations to think through how to react. And you can see here we've highlighted in red all of the areas that are part of your cyber and fraud prevention. And you can see it's an awful lot of those processes people are focused on. So in the beginning, organizations looked to pretty much make sure they had enough liquidity and then make sure their teams could work remotely. Medium term, you saw a lot of organizations doing things that they needed to do to operate efficiently, but at the same time starting to address things that they'd always really wanted to address. So there are some positives coming out of a pretty bad situation. And then longer term, you can see that organizations are getting the funding, the resourcing, and that sort of thing to do the sorts of optimization of their teams, adding resilience. Resilience is a term we're hearing a lot about, because the idea is you're trying to make sure that your team can function regardless of what happens. So if a loved one gets sick or somebody becomes somewhat impaired, your organization can continue on. And technology is being adopted in a larger and larger way to help with these things. Mike, have you seen similar trends?
Yeah, absolutely. From our side of the house, we've seen certain changes as well. The movement to remote work has certainly enabled companies to, as you said, have some positives. It gives people the ability to work in other places, work remotely, but with that has come certain challenges and other considerations that may not have always been thought through all the way. But yes, we've absolutely seen similar changes on our end as well.
And so now to the meat of the topic. We wanted to give you a framework within which to think about how you are dealing with this. And the topic of cyber risk is a very, very large topic. The treasurer, the CFO really are focused mostly on making sure that you can continue to do business and that your financial operations and your financial transactions are not impacted. So the attacks we're going to focus on are things where bad players are trying to get you to misdirect your payments, or your folks that owe you money misdirecting your receivables and impeding your operations. So those are the attacks that we're focused on. But the methods of access are very interesting, and you need to think about these and make sure that you've plugged as many of these holes as you possibly can. And so you will have heard of things like Trojans or business email compromise, social engineering. We specifically separate weak technology from unpatched systems. Some organizations have excellent technology, but it's dated. They haven't been keeping up with the patches and the security plugs, and that's where you can get really burned pretty badly. And then, of course, there's weak technology, which allows for different things to happen. And, you know, even though we've talked about the different methods of access here, usually it's a combination of these. I think, Mike, you've got a few examples of that.
Yeah, so when it comes to business email compromise, and I think a lot of people don't really pay this kind of compromise the respect that it's due, because we think, oh, all they've done is gained access to my email. Who cares? There's nothing of value in there. But what we're finding is that our attackers have been doing this for 3-4 years now. And over those 3 or 4 years, they've become very good at what they do. It begins with some social engineering, learning about the company, learning who works in which department of the company. And they're typically looking at people in finance, right? Because those are the folks that control the money. Can't misdirect a payment if you don't have access to the people that control the money. So they look on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever social environment or social platform that you use, these folks are looking there to gain as much information about you as they can. From there, what they do is they send you an email that looks like something that you would expect to receive from your company. You know, hey, this is an encrypted message, click on this link, and you'll have to log into the website using your password and user ID and password. You get to the website, it looks just like your corporate website. Great, wonderful, right? So you log in only to find out that the page leads to nothing. All right, well, most people don't think much about that and just say, you know, if it was really important, they'll email me back again. When in reality, the attacker has just collected your user ID and password and now has access to your email through Office 365 or the Google suite of platforms, whatever email platform you use. Even if it's an in-house Exchange server, you're still allowed to access that email remotely. And these people know how to do that, right? So once they gain access to your account, what they do is they immediately set up a forwarding rule in your account. Now, what a forwarding rule is for them is it forwards all of the mail that you receive out to the attacker's email box. So let's just call it attacker@gmail.com. They'll also then go through your inbox and look for any emails or communication threads that you have with somebody that may owe you money, so a client or a vendor. And then from there, they take over that conversation. Now by take over, I mean they literally step in and begin communicating with that client or vendor, telling them to deposit this next payment to a new bank account. And how do they hide those responses from the client or vendor? By setting what's called an inbox rule. That inbox rule says any new emails that I receive from client or vendor at clientorvendor.com, mark it as read and move it into a folder like the deleted folder that I would never look for. So they're hiding in plain sight using your account against you. And of course, our client or vendors are then sending payment to a different bank account, which is owned and operated by our attacker. So these business email compromises don't just could lead to you guys misdirecting your payments to other companies, right? But as I've also pointed out, it can lead to your clients or vendors sending payments somewhere else. So you're not just misdirecting payments potentially, you're also misdirecting receivables, right?
Yeah.
So it's a huge issue.
So, and this is just one example of the sorts of things that Mike is dealing with. There are way too many for us to cover in the framework of this conversation, but we'd like to talk a little about the types before we get into some best practice recommendations. So what Mike is talking about might have been that you started with a compromise of your procedures or your controls, or because that email went to one of your counterparts, they may violate their procedures and controls. So there's ways to protect against that. Mike also talked about a stealth takeover because they were able to get inside your environment and take advantage of it. And we haven't talked about this because it's more of an organizational issue, but Mike has been dealing with, I think you said, Mike, the instances of ransomware have gone up dramatically, and you guys are dealing with a ton of that.
Yeah, as companies have moved to remote workforce, they have allowed people to gain easier access to the network, and of course, attackers take advantage of that. Once they gain access inside your network, They're looking for this weak technology and unpatched systems because that means there's vulnerabilities that they can exploit. And our attackers have gotten so good at this, our ransomware attackers specifically, that it used to take them days to learn about your environment, encrypt data, and not just encrypt data, but they're stealing sensitive data now too to encourage you to pay the ransom. But they've gone further, and they are also now able to do this within 45 minutes, gaining access to your network, escalating to the appropriate credentials they need, the appropriate accounts, to then conduct the network kind of reconnaissance, and then push out the ransomware and encrypt your data. It's very quick now.
That's scary, scary stuff. So we'd like to move on to some best practice recommendations. This first slide here is a framework for you to start thinking about how you would protect what you've got. Now, you've probably already got a majority of this in place, but it's always good to relook at it. As a matter of fact, one of our recommendations is you should quarterly relook at it. If not, then at least annually. So if you think about your procure-to-pay process, you've got supplier management on one side and all the way through executing payments and analytics and reporting after the payment's been made. And so here in this diagram, areas that are green are areas you should look at to be fraud mitigation areas, and the items in red boxes are areas where you should really critically try and have something in place, like a system and a workflow and some controls to stop bad things from happening. And so you can see you could have a supplier validation and account validation tools we'll talk about in a second, things like Ariba. On the invoice processing side, we think it's really important to do matching because if you've got a purchase order and you've got a receiving document, so it's a three-way match between what you're about to do and the information you've already got. And if something's out of line, well, then you don't send the money until you can validate everything's appropriate. And then you've got payment approval workflow. Now, everybody's got some kind of a payment workflow, but this is an area that organizations are adding a lot more technology to and forcing things to happen. I'll talk about that a little more. Payment and fraud analysis. There are some lovely tools out there available today. Some of the artificial intelligence tools have gotten very advanced, and you can do things where you're trying to identify anomalous transactions, and that jumps right out. Fraud insurance is something we always talk about, and that's something to be, most of you have it. You need to be very careful with what the writer actually describes because you can get burned there. Mike, you've got some recommendations really around the scenario that you discussed.
Yeah, because business email compromise is so prevalent right now, we just wanted to provide a few best practices, and they're very simple, right? From a corporate perspective, we want to make sure that our company is limiting or preventing the email or mass forwarding of emails, right? We don't want to see any emails all of our emails being allowed to go out to an outside of work email account. We want to prevent or limit access from other email accounts. So for example, we've seen attackers sync somebody's business account with a mobile mail client, right? So they can get all the mail that way. We want to make sure that your company is collecting the appropriate access logs that for your account, such that if somebody does gain access to your account, we want to make sure that we can understand what happened, when, where, who, why, how, and what, to limit any potential notifications down the line. And of course, limit access from other countries. If you don't work in Nigeria, South Korea, Russia, Germany, wherever, right, doesn't matter, then don't allow access from those countries. And most importantly, right, last two things are the most important: enable multi-factor authentication for email and any other cloud-based applications you use, QuickBook in the clouds, anything else that might be there, and make sure that you're training your employees. Teach them what to look for in a phishing email, and then conduct good phishing tests that give them something to find so that they are successful with those phishing tests.
Yeah, my IT department send around the phishing emails that they've gotten saying, this is the latest one we've got, everybody be on alert, you are not supposed to touch something like this. And because the attempts just change and morph and get more sophisticated. I learned from Mike about the account logs. His team used those extensively to figure out what had happened and how to plug the hole. And then the other scary thing I hear about, and it happens everywhere, senior people in a lot of organizations don't like to be bothered changing their passwords on a regular basis and that sort of thing. And quite frankly, managing all the passwords we have to manage these days are a nightmare. And so we see too often people using a very simple password either for their personal stuff that lets people get access to their work environment, or they use the same password. So once they've compromised their personal information somehow, the bad players now have access to your corporate environment. You don't want any of that. One of the last slides we'll show on today's webinar are some of the recommendations we have specifically around AP and IR control protocols. These were presented originally by a treasurer who developed them, and Mike and I have enhanced them a little bit. And some of these are very obvious to you, but you need to look at them again to make sure that they're in fact robust. So enforced segregation of duties. Everybody seems to understand that one person who puts in the payment request can't be the one who executes the payment request, that sort of thing. And what treasurers and CFOs have discovered is that in the work from home environment, it became clear that some of those had not been adhered to quite as diligently as they thought they were, and they're finding ways to reinforce them. And it's a systemic, meaning using technology to put a workflow in place, something like using your ERP, your treasury management system, or your banking systems to enforce that the same person can't do two things. Also, there are vendor management systems to consider, like Concur and Ariba and early warning. And these are things, early warning is probably the leading account validation tool out there, but it's not easy to use. So you have to be very sophisticated in how you use it. And then one of the last items I'll mention here, because again, you can read through these and think about them, but senior management support. We have heard repeatedly that when people, very, very senior people, have said, hey, there's a problem here, we should address this, or your group need to change the way they're doing things, you get natural pushback from people saying, no, there's no way our group could be vulnerable or causing a vulnerability. And in some cases, we've had the chief risk officer actually get chastised by other C-level executives for blowing the whistle, and only a short time later getting hit with something. So make sure that you have an organization that reacts positively when you hear somebody saying there may be a problem. I want to thank you for listening to us. We didn't have a lot of time today to do this, so we have left an awful lot of additional information after this in the deck that hopefully you can be provided. And if you have any questions for us, our emails are at the beginning. Mike and I are more than happy to entertain any questions you have and respond with whatever we can to help you. Thank you.